Hi, I've been really sick with flu, and it takes a long time to get over a bad cold. Um, and so, especially if you go to dog parks again. So, I was watching Pulp Fiction by Tarantino because it's listed as one of the movies you must watch on Netflix before it's taken off. And I thought, well, I've never seen Pulp Fiction. Everybody's talking about it. And I was watching Gilmore Girls, and there's a scene there where there's a theme party of Pulp Fiction, and I'm thinking, wow, it's a cult movie, and it's the most quoted film. So just to tell you what I think about movies by Tarantino, I think they're very violent. I think they reflect, sadly, the reality in the US. That's a very, very violent reality, and the racism. And I actually think it's good that it deals with it because what I hate most of all the things I hate in the world, it's cover ups. And Tarantino really exposes American society for the violence and the history of violence there. Um, and it's weird that he's chosen to live in Israel, which I find to be a very violent place as well. I was just reading an article in the left wing paper about what happened at where there's a confrontation between Israeli soldiers and Palestinians. And we Israelis that are thinkers, I think for the most part, we live in two ways. Either we're activists or we are denial. We we cannot possibly live in such a violent place without either taking a stand and being activists or choosing denial. And I think a lot of times we choose denial. We do live in a very violent society, and sometimes I wonder why Tarantino chose to live in Israel part time and to marry an Israeli wife, because he didn't have to. When you think about it, the person you marry does reflect your values, and Israel, if he had chosen to look into Israel, he would have a lot to deal with. But he's American and he's choosing to dissect the society in which he lives. So Pulp Fiction is about choices, making the moral choice. So the boxer, um, played by Bruce Willis, he has a choice to make, and he's given choices, like he could abandon the watch that he is very important for him, the watch, with the crazy story, or he could leave town, but then he goes back for the watch, and then he has other moral decisions to make. Does he save the gangster with whom he made a deal? And actually, he ends up making a choice to maybe, and the question is always, did he make a choice based on caring for the person who is whom he hears is being tortured, or does he think, well, this way I don't have to look over my shoulder? So it's about redemption. It's about making the right choices. And there's also the scene of the robbery in the diner, and this coffee shop diner, and this gangster choosing to save the situation by making a very smart decision, making a deal with the robber, and thus saving the people. So, and he also has this obsession with quoting the Bible. And it reminds me of a book I read about a character that used to, he was a robber in a way, but he was also saving African Americans from slavery. He was helping them escape. He was a very important figure in American history of slavery, and he was a man of the book. Like, he followed the Bible, and he thought that his mission was to save the slaves, to release them, like to be some sort of Moses. Um, and so that reminds me of probably a history of people that were acting in violence, but justifying it by thinking they are redeeming, they're saving, um, they're on a mission, from a divine mission to save people and to rescue them. And indeed, the whole topic of slavery is a very interesting topic, um, which really has been dealt a lot um, in definitely American novels and definitely films. And so it's really an interesting topic that I just had my association because I'm really fascinated by African American history and the slavery and the release, and also how it affects modern history and the racism. And there's so much going on in America with people being shot just because they're the color of their skin on the one hand. On the other hand, also the jails, the American prisons are full of people that are of African American origin, and it's not a coincidence. It's the history and the oppression of the African Americans that led to them living in very difficult conditions. And no matter how much you can try to balance it, there's always, by giving them opportunities, there's such a post-trauma there, so much post-trauma there. And it's so interesting because you can't really compare the history of one people to another. You can't compare African Americans to Jews or to anyone, actually. Anyone, every people has their own history. And I'm really interested, like the Tarantino film, that the only one I watched up until Pulp Fiction was Inglourious Basterds, which is a very fascinating film, which is based actually on facts. There was a Jewish brigade which went into Nazi-occupied Europe to try to save people, or to revenge the try to stop the Holocaust somehow, and to revenge the murder of Jews. And it was like by German-speaking Jews. And that's how he met his wife, actually. Tarantino met his Jewish Israeli wife during the film showing of this Inglourious Basterds in Jerusalem. And then they fell in love, or I don't know what you call it. I think you choose partners. When you marry a partner, you actually marry their history. It's not a coincidence. When you choose a person, you actually marry their heritage. It's not a coincidence that you marry a certain person, I believe. And it's quite interesting why Tarantino chose to marry a Jewish Israeli woman from Polish descent whose family suffered in the Holocaust. And he made this film, and you would think he would, he has some sensitivity to the plight of the Jewish people, but his use of violence in his films, I guess it has to do with some sort of culture of violence in America that he embraced. But I don't know. His films are so violent, and they reduce human beings to just being victims just because he can. It's his choices that he makes, and there's just so much violence, and violence is very addictive. It's like chocolate, and it's like salt. They're addictive. Salt and sugar are addictive as heroin, and the whole idea of drugs. And his characters are not very smart people, but they're like messengers. I wouldn't say he's my favorite filmmaker. I would say probably not at all. But I'm fascinated with his popularity, and also why he chose to live in Israel, because I find Israel to be to be a country that lives in a very violent neighborhood, and as a result, you're kind of forced to live like in a Quentin Tarantino film. We're forced to be violent, to act in violence in order to protect ourselves. And I feel the mafia bosses there are just pulling the strings, whether it's Putin or Assad or whoever the hell is pulling the strings, we're just living in a cycle of violence that I really wonder when we'll stop living a Quentin Tarantino reality and when we'll actually be redeemed from this violence. I really do wonder about that. And the fact that he lives here is just so odd to me, for me. So Pulp Fiction is not my favorite movie at all. I don't like movies that have a lot of violence. I like movies that have deep messages, but not violence. I like movies that might be more boring, might have less action, might have less going on, but people treat each other with respect, because I think what you watch goes into your consciousness. And if you watch violent movies, it affects you. And I think it's better to not watch violent content. I'm not attracted to violence, and it doesn't do anything for me but make me feel sad and angry and want to not watch it. So I wouldn't recommend this movie or any Quentin Tarantino films. Certainly they're very clever and there's a mechanism there, but I just don't like to watch people kill each other. God knows there's enough violence in the world, and I just don't understand why anyone would choose to make a movie. I don't understand also the fascination with crime we have in our society. There's so many channels dedicated to crime watch, and especially US, and I really wonder why we spend our short time on earth dealing with violence. God knows we have a short time to live, so why focus on how some people choose to destroy, to destruct, to choose destruction over construction, to choose hate over love. Anyway, make the right choices.